My name is Victoria Harrison. Most people call me Vic. And the night my younger sister stood in the center of a chandeliered ballroom in Charleston, raised her champagne flute toward 200 guests dressed in silk and summer linen, and introduced me as the older sister, who never quite managed to do anything remarkable. I did not cry. I did not shout. I did not collapse under the weight of 42 years spent carrying a family that refused to see me. I simply stood there in my $89 Target dress, beige and forgettable, and thought, little sister, you really have no idea who you're talking to. Because that night, tucked inside the small purse hanging from my shoulder, were three things: a cell phone vibrating with emails about an investigation that could destroy the career I'd spent 2 decades building, a printed copy of the mission log from 18 hours earlier, the one that recorded how I'd pulled 27 people, 9 of them children, from freezing water in the middle of a Lake Michigan blizzard, and a bank statement folded into quarters, the kind most people would frame instead of hide. The number at the bottom read $12,437,892.67, $12.4 million. That was the amount Natalie, my baby sister, currently laughing as she painted me as the family punchline, did not know I possessed. That was the sum my mother, nodding along from across the room in her purple suit, had never thought to ask about. That was the fortune not a single person in this family knew existed, because none of them had ever asked what I actually did with my life beyond their casual assumptions. They simply decided that Vic, the quiet older daughter who did something with boats on the water, must be failing. But 48 hours from this moment, when the truth finally surfaced, about the money, about the hero's mission, about the Navy SEAL who would stand at attention and salute me in front of everyone who'd ever dismissed me, every assumption would shatter like champagne crystal on marble floors. And that night, I would stand in silence and watch their world reconfigure itself. Not because I wanted revenge, but because it was finally time they saw the truth. This is the story of how I reclaimed my dignity, not by screaming, not by begging, but by simply existing as exactly who I was. And as it turned out, who I was turned out to be far more powerful than they ever imagined. The morning after this Great Lakes rescue, I stood on the deck of the USCGC Sturgeon Bay at 5:30 in the morning, my body screaming protests in every muscle that mattered. 14 hours of operating in sub-zero wind chill had left bruises across my ribs where the safety harness had dug in, purple-black shadows blooming under my uniform. My hands were raw despite the gloves, rope burns layered over older scars from a career spent pulling people back from the edge of drowning. 27 souls made it home alive because of the decision I'd made at 9:47 the previous night, when the radar showed ice drift at Vector 315, and I'd overruled my junior officer's recommendation to follow GPS standard protocol. 27 people were drinking coffee with their families right now, instead of becoming statistics in Coast Guard incident reports. The lake behind me still churned with residual anger, gray-green swells that hadn't yet forgiven the storm. Detroit's glass towers caught the pale dawn light and threw it back in muted flashes, the city waking to a morning it didn't know had nearly included tragedy. I'd always found a strange comfort in Detroit's industrial honesty, the way it never pretended to be something it wasn't. No one here measured you against impossible standards or wondered why you weren't someone else. My phone buzzed, not the gentle vibration of a text, but the insistent pulse of multiple emails arriving in rapid succession. The first was from my mother, Judith. No greeting, just a numbered list of instructions. Natalie's engagement party was in 3 days. I had to be there. I should not wear my uniform because Cole Mitchell, the SEAL captain fiancé, had once worked with someone from the Coast Guard who apparently hadn't impressed him. Could I try to look more feminine? Could I buy a nice dress? Use a credit card if I needed to. Femininity. I stood there holding the phone, looking down at my hands. These were the hands that had secured a rescue line to a capsizing vessel 6 hours earlier, working in total darkness with waves crashing over the deck. These hands had pulled a 4-year-old girl out of water so cold her lips had turned blue, had held her against my chest while the helicopter winched us both to safety. My mother thought these hands needed to look more feminine. The second email came from district headquarters, and it arrived with the red flag that marked urgent official correspondence. Captain Harrison, This message constitutes formal notification of an investigation into your conduct during the Great Lakes Rescue Operation on January 12, 2026. Lieutenant Jason Pierce has filed a complaint alleging violation of safety protocols, specifically that you issued unsafe navigational orders that endangered your crew. Suspension pending investigation is under consideration. You are required to submit a full incident report within 72 hours. Failure to comply will result in immediate administrative action. I read it 3 times. The words didn't change. Jason Pierce, 29 years old, the son of a retired rear admiral and nephew of a sitting Michigan senator, had decided that the mission where I'd saved 27 lives was actually evidence of my incompetence. The mission where I'd been right and he'd been catastrophically wrong. I closed the email and looked back out at the lake. 20 years in the Coast Guard had taught me to recognize the shape of political attacks, and this had all the hallmarks. Jason had wanted to go with Vector 315 because it was faster, because it looked decisive on paper, because it would have gotten us to the scene 12 minutes sooner. The fact that it would have driven us straight into a field of ice drift massive enough to crush our hull didn't matter to him, not when he was thinking about how the mission report would read. I'd overruled him in front of the crew. And men like Jason Pierce, men who'd grown up believing their last name was a shield against consequence, never forgave that kind of correction. The investigation was a retaliation, pure and simple, but retaliation backed by a senator's office could still end my career. I didn't panic. Panic was for people who'd never stood on a deck in 40-knot winds and made choices that meant life or death. I simply filed the information away in the same mental compartment where I kept every other truth about power and politics, then turned and walked back into the cabin. My duty shift was over. I had 72 hours to write a report that would determine whether the next 20 years of my career existed at all. And before I could do that, I had to fly to Charleston and stand in my younger sister's engagement party while she introduced me as the disappointment. The Atlantic offered no wisdom through the plane's small oval window. Just endless blue cut by white contrails from planes heading to destinations that probably mattered more than a family obligation I'd learned long ago to expect nothing from. I'd booked the economy seat myself, paying with my own credit card, even though the account that payment came from held enough money to buy the entire first-class cabin. Old habits died hard. I'd been living carefully for so long that even wealth hadn't changed my baseline instincts. The man in the seat beside me wore a windbreaker with an embroidered anchor and USS Constellation patch, the kind of casual military identification that meant he either wanted to be recognized or had stopped caring whether anyone noticed. He had the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades squinting into sun and salt spray, deep lines carved around eyes that tracked everything. Those eyes landed on me with the unmistakable assessment of someone who recognized the posture, the bearing, the particular way people who'd served in uniform carried themselves even in civilian clothes. He waited until we'd reached cruising altitude before speaking. The question came without preamble. "You serve?" "Yes, sir. Coast Guard." His posture shifted slightly, interest sharpening. "Which sector?" "Detroit, sir." Something changed in his expression, a kind of sudden alertness that made my pulse quicken even though I couldn't identify why. "Detroit." He repeated it slowly, testing the word. "Were you involved in the rescue operation night before last? The blizzard over the lake?" "Yes, sir." The retired admiral, because that's what he had to be, given the way he carried authority like a second skin, leaned back slightly and studied my face with new intensity. "I'm Richard Thornton, Rear Admiral, retired 15 years, and I got the briefing this morning about that mission. 27 people pulled from a sinking ferry in conditions that should have killed everyone involved." He paused, and I saw something raw move across his features. My grandson was on that boat. 9 years old, Daniel Thornton. His mother took him on what was supposed to be a quick afternoon trip across the lake. The memory surfaced immediately. Blonde hair plastered to a small skull, blue lips, tiny hands gripping the rescue harness so tightly I'd had to pry his fingers loose one by one to transfer him to the helicopter basket. His mother screaming his name into the wind, reaching for him even as we secured her to a separate line. "I remember him," I said quietly. "He was brave, didn't cry once we got him secured." Admiral Thornton's eyes went bright with something that might have been tears, though he blinked them away before they could fall. "Who commanded that operation?" The question landed like a test, though I couldn't guess what answer he was expecting. "I did, sir." He went very still. Captain Harrison? Yes, sir. The handshake he offered came with enough force to make my shoulder joint protest after the night's physical demands. When he held on for 3 seconds longer than protocol required, I understood that this was gratitude finding an outlet through the only gesture military training had given him. Captain Harrison, his voice dropped to something rougher, you saved my family. If you ever need anything, and I mean anything at all, you call me. He pulled a business card from his wallet, the kind with a personal cell number handwritten on the back. This isn't empty words, this is a promise. I tucked the card into my purse, right next to the bank statement I carried like a talisman. I didn't know yet that 48 hours from now, that card would be the difference between keeping my career and losing everything. Sometimes grace arrives before you know you need it. The hotel room in Charleston cost $89 a night, the kind of place where the air conditioning rattled and the bathroom tiles had been white sometime in the previous decade. I'd booked it myself because my mother hadn't offered to cover accommodations. Just assumed I'd handle it the way I handled everything. Quietly, without complaint, making myself smaller so Natalie could expand into all available space. I set my small duffel on the bed and opened my laptop before I'd even taken off my jacket. The investigation email demanded a response timeline, but first I needed to check something else. Something I checked every morning as part of a ritual that had started 15 years ago, when the first real money had arrived. The portfolio management site loaded with its clean white interface and neat columns of numbers. I typed in my password, a random string that included the coordinates of my first solo rescue mission, and watched my net worth populate across multiple accounts. Main checking, $4,237,441.18. Investment portfolio, $6,892,556 even. Real estate equity, $2,890,000 based on the latest assessment. Startup residual account, $417,895.49. Total, $12,437,892.67. I stared at the number the way I did every morning, still half expecting it to be a mistake, some digital error that would correct itself and reveal I was exactly who my family believed me to be. A civil servant making a modest salary, living a careful life, barely scraping by. The money had started with a maritime safety software platform I'd helped develop during my off-duty hours 15 years ago. 3 of us, all Coast Guard personnel, had noticed patterns in rescue data that suggested ice drift could be predicted more accurately using machine learning algorithms. We'd built the system in borrowed office space, coding through long Michigan winters, driven by the belief that better prediction meant fewer deaths. When the Maritime Safety Corporation had offered $8.2 million for the buyout in 2019, I'd signed the papers in a conference room in downtown Detroit with hands that shook so badly, I'd had to steady my wrist with my other hand. My partners had taken their money and retired early. I'd taken mine and sent $50,000 to my mother with a note saying it was from an emergency fund, then invested the rest in index funds in Detroit real estate that no one else wanted. The real estate had been the second windfall. I'd bought 3 houses in 2009 during the financial collapse, paying $40,000 each for properties in neighborhoods that realtors literally laughed about. I'd spent weekends and leave days repairing them myself, learning plumbing and electrical work from YouTube videos, turning shells into livable homes. I'd rented them to young families who couldn't qualify for mortgages, charged fair rates, and built equity, while the city slowly remembered how to believe in itself. Those 3 houses were worth $450,000 each now. The market had finally recognized what I'd seen back when everyone else was fleeing, that Detroit was too stubborn to die. My phone buzzed with the text. My mother, sending her 15th message of the day. Did you land? You need to buy a nice dress. Not your usual style, something feminine. Natalie is worried you'll embarrass her. I looked at the phone, then at the laptop screen showing $12.4 million. Then at the beige dress hanging in the open closet. $89 from Target, purchased because it met my mother's requirements. Unremarkable, forgettable, appropriate for someone who didn't matter. I typed back, I'll be there, Mom. Not I landed safely. Not I'm looking forward to it. Not tell Natalie I'm happy for her. Just the bare minimum acknowledgement that I'd received her instructions and would comply. My mother responded immediately, good, and Vic, Try to smile more. You always look so serious. I closed the text thread without answering and returned to the investigation email. I had 72 hours to compile a defense that would prove I'd made the correct call under pressure, that my decision to deviate from standard protocol had been based on superior situational awareness and real-time data analysis. I had evidence. I had the radar log showing the ice drift. I had the mission recordings. I had the outcome. 27 people alive who would be dead if I'd followed Jason Pierce's recommendation. But Jason Pierce had a senator's office and a retired admiral father who still had friends in high places. And in my experience, connections often mattered more than competence. The second email arrived while I was reviewing the mission files. This one made my pulse spike in a way the first hadn't. Captain Harrison, additional information regarding the investigation. Lieutenant Pierce has retained private legal counsel, specifically Martin Pierce, senior partner at Pierce & Associates and son of Senator Pierce. They are alleging you falsified logs to cover a dangerous error in judgment. They possess a separate logbook signed by 3 crew members stating Vector 315 was the agreed-upon safe route. Investigation has been escalated. Suspension is now active, pending hearing scheduled for 0500 hours, January 16th. Your presence is mandatory. Failure to appear will result in termination. I read it twice, then closed the laptop very carefully. The way you close things when you're trying not to break them. Jason Pierce wasn't just attacking my competence, he was manufacturing evidence to support a false narrative, using the kind of legal and political infrastructure that could reshape truth into whatever story served their interests. And the hearing was in 3 days, 5 a.m., which meant I'd have to leave Charleston the night of Natalie's engagement party if I wanted to make it back to Detroit in time. My mother and sister were about to get even less of my attention than they'd been expecting. And given their baseline expectations were already scraping bottom, this was going to go over about as well as telling them I'd just won the lottery but wouldn't be sharing. I called Natalie. She answered on the 4th ring, slightly breathless. "Vic, you're here?" Her voice carried that particular mix of sweetness and tension she always got when she needed something but wanted to pretend she didn't. "Just landed. Wanted to confirm timing for tomorrow. 7 p.m. at the Ashford House. You remember where that is?" I remember. A pause, then the request came wrapped in concern. "Vic, about your job thing, the Coast Guard stuff. Cole mentioned he worked with someone from the Guard once, and it didn't go well. So maybe just keep the work talk to a minimum? I don't want him to get the wrong impression about our family." The wrong impression. As if my career was something that reflected poorly on them, rather than something I'd built through competence and 2 decades of dedication. "I understand." My voice came out flat, empty of the emotion churning beneath. Natalie didn't notice. She never did. "Great, and you bought a dress, right? Something pretty? Not the usual Coast Guard casual thing?" "I have a dress." "Perfect. See you tomorrow night. Love you." The call ended before I could respond. Not that there was anything to say. Natalie had been doing this for 20 years, shaping me into the version of a sister she could handle, asking me to be smaller so she could feel larger, requesting I hide the parts of myself that might remind people she wasn't the only daughter worth noticing. I'd spent 42 years complying with these requests, believing that love meant accommodation, that family required constant self-editing. But something had shifted in the last 24 hours. Maybe it was pulling a child from freezing water and realizing how fragile life actually was. Maybe it was the investigation threatening to take away the one thing I'd never compromised. Maybe it was just exhaustion finally outweighing compliance. I looked at my phone, then at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back had earned every line on her face, every gray hair starting to show at her temples, every scar hidden under her civilian clothes. That woman had saved 27 lives. That woman had built a fortune through intelligence and careful planning. That woman commanded respect from everyone who actually knew what she did. And tomorrow night, that woman was going to stand in a ballroom while her family introduced her as the disappointment. The thought should have hurt more than it did. But somewhere between the storm in the investigation and the casual cruelty of my sister's request, I'd crossed a threshold I hadn't even known existed. I wasn't angry. Anger required hope that things could be different. I was simply done pretending their version of me had anything to do with reality. They were going to learn who I actually was, whether I wanted them to or not, because the truth had a way of surfacing, especially when you stopped working so hard to keep it buried. Silence is not absence, I thought, looking at my reflection. Silence is choice. Silence is strength dressed in satin. And I had been silent for long enough. The Ashford house glowed like something from a historical romance, all white columns and centuries-old oak trees draped with Spanish moss that swayed in the warm Charleston evening. String lights wove through the branches, casting patterns across manicured lawns where 200 guests mingled with champagne flutes and southern charm. The air smelled like magnolia and money, that particular combination of natural beauty and cultivated wealth that existed nowhere else quite like it did in the Low Country. I walked up the front steps in my Target dress, carrying a small purse that contained my phone, my wallet, the business card Admiral Thornton had given me, and the folded bank statement I'd started carrying like proof I wasn't imagining my own life. No one turned to look when I entered. The conversations continued uninterrupted, a river of voices flowing around me as if I were a stone smooth enough not to create ripples. I'd perfected the art of arriving without disturbing anyone, of taking up exactly the amount of space I was allowed, and not a molecule more. My mother stood near the far windows with a group of women in pastels, her purple suit catching light as she gestured with animated hands. She was telling a story, playing to her audience, and whatever the punchline was made them all laugh in that polite way that meant it wasn't quite funny enough, but they were being kind. I started walking toward her. She didn't see me until I was 3 feet away, and when she finally registered my presence, her eyes did this thing they always did. A quick scan from head to toe, a microscopic assessment of whether I met her standards, followed by a barely perceptible tightening around her mouth that meant I'd fallen short. "Oh, Victoria, you made it!" She didn't move to hug me. Neither did I. We'd stopped pretending physical affection years ago. "Everyone, this is my older daughter, Victoria. She does some work up north, on the water." One of the women, elegant in pale yellow linen, smiled with curiosity. "On the water? Like a marine biologist?" The laughter came softly. A collective chuckle that wasn't quite mockery, but definitely wasn't respect. "No, no." My mother waved this away as if correcting a child's misunderstanding. "Victoria works for the Coast Guard. She chose a different path than Natalie, but she's doing fine." Fine. The word people used when they couldn't think of anything actually complimentary to say, when they were performing politeness while communicating disappointment. I stood there and felt that word settle over me like dust. Fine. After 20 years of service, after saving 27 lives less than 48 hours ago, after building a fortune in silence while sending money home to cover their expenses. Fine. A man in a Navy Reserve uniform stood slightly apart from the group, and I felt his eyes on me with a different quality of attention. He was older, maybe mid-60s, with the particular alertness of someone who'd spent a career reading situations that most people missed. He didn't join the laughter. He just watched me with narrowing eyes, as if trying to place a face he almost recognized. The yellow linen woman tried again, her tone friendly in that aggressively cheerful way that meant she was trying to cover the awkwardness my mother had created. "And what exactly do you do in the Coast Guard? Administrative work?" Before I could answer, my mother's hand landed on the woman's forearm, and I recognized the gesture. It meant they were about to share a joke at my expense. "Victoria does paperwork mostly, I think. She's never been very good at explaining it." My mother's smile went brittle at the edges. "But that's fine. Natalie is the one who really made us proud. She built her entire event planning business from nothing, you know." From nothing. Except for the $15,000 I'd sent her in 2021 for startup costs, and the $18,000 I'd sent in 2023 when her biggest client had declared bankruptcy, and the $11,000 I'd sent last year when she'd needed new equipment. But yes, from nothing. The group made sympathetic noises, the kind that confirmed I'd been properly placed in their mental hierarchy. The disappointing daughter. The one who'd chosen a path that didn't translate well at cocktail parties. The one they could safely ignore. I should have spoken. Should have corrected the record, explained that I commanded a Coast Guard station, that my work involved coordinating rescue operations across one of the most dangerous bodies of water in North America, that the paperwork they were dismissing so casually included decisions that meant life or death. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the memory of every other time I'd tried to explain and been met with glassy-eyed disinterest. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the investigation hanging over my head, reminding me that nothing was certain, that everything I'd built could still be taken away. Or maybe it was something else, a decision forming in the back of my mind, still shapeless but gaining substance with every passing second. Let them think what they think. Let them believe their version of me. And when the truth finally surfaced, because truth always surfaced, especially truth this big, let them reckon with the gap between their assumptions and reality. Silence is not absence, silence is choice. I smiled at the group, the small, careful smile I'd perfected over decades of these interactions. That's right, just paperwork mostly. My mother's shoulders relaxed slightly, grateful I wasn't going to embarrass her by claiming to be more important than she'd portrayed me. The group's attention had already moved on, drifting toward more interesting topics. The Navy Reserve officer hadn't stopped watching me. Something in his expression suggested he knew I was lying, that he'd recognized the lie for exactly what it was, a strategic choice to let people underestimate me. Our eyes met for just a second, and I saw the faintest nod, recognition between two people who'd learned the same lessons about power and perception. Then Natalie's voice cut through the ambient conversation, bright and crystalline and demanding attention the way she'd always demanded it. Everyone, if I could have your attention, please. The room quieted. 200 people turning toward the curved staircase where my sister stood in a pink silk dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. She looked radiant, glowing with the particular light that came from being absolutely certain you were loved, admired, and celebrated exactly as you deserved. Behind her, a man in full seal dress uniform descended the stairs. Cole Mitchell, tall, broad-shouldered, carrying authority like he'd been born to it. The uniform was pristine, every ribbon and medal placed with mathematical precision. He had the kind of face that would have been at home on recruiting posters. Square jaw, clear eyes, the sort of uncomplicated handsomeness that suggested both competence and reliability. His hand rested on Natalie's waist with casual possession, and she leaned into him with the ease of someone who'd never doubted she deserved this kind of devotion. I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. Natalie's voice carried to every corner of the room, practiced and smooth. Cole and I are so grateful to have family and friends here to celebrate with us. She turned slightly, scanning the crowd, and her eyes found me near the windows. Something flickered across her face. Not quite guilt, not quite discomfort, but something adjacent to both. And of course, I want to introduce everyone to my sister Victoria. She paused just long enough for people to follow her gesture. Victoria came all the way from Michigan for this. She works for the Coast Guard up there, doing important work with boats and things. 27 lives saved in a blizzard reduced to boats and things. The room did its polite applause, the kind that acknowledged a person's existence without actually caring. Natalie smiled at me, and I recognized the expression. It was the smile that said, I'm including you, see? I'm being a good sister. But the word she'd chosen, the casual dismissal wrapped in false praise, told the real story. I was the sister who existed to make her look better by comparison. The dutiful older sibling who showed up when required, but never quite measured up to the daughter who'd gotten everything right. I didn't wave, didn't smile, just stood there while 200 people glanced at me and immediately forgot I existed. Cole started speaking, his voice carrying the particular cadence of someone used to briefing rooms and command decisions. He was telling a story about a joint operation, something involving SEALs and Coast Guard assets in Alaska. His tone was warm, self-deprecating in that calculated way that made people like you, while never doubting your competence. And the Coast Guard liaison assigned us Vector 315 for the approach. Standard procedure, straight shot to the target area. He smiled, shaking his head. We followed the recommended route, hit an unexpected ice field, and spent 3 hours extracting ourselves, lost valuable time on a time-sensitive operation. People laughed appreciatively. A few naval officers in the crowd nodded, recognizing the kind of operational snafu that made for good dinner party stories after the fact. Something cold unfurled in my chest. Vector 315, the same vector Jason Pierce had wanted to use 2 nights ago. The vector that would have killed 27 people if I'd been foolish enough to follow it. And here was Cole Mitchell, SEAL captain, telling a roomful of people that the Coast Guard had given bad guidance, had wasted his time, had been incompetent. I should have stayed silent, should have let it pass, the way I'd let everything else pass. But something in me, maybe the exhaustion, maybe the investigation, maybe just the accumulation of 42 years of being small, refused. My voice came out clear and calm, cutting through the friendly laughter with surgical precision. Vector 315 was wrong. The room went silent, not gradually, immediately, as if someone had thrown a switch. Cole's eyes found me in the crowd. Confusion flickered across his face. Then something sharper. I'm sorry? I didn't move toward him, didn't raise my voice, just continued in that same level tone, the one I used when giving orders that couldn't be questioned. Vector 315 in that region, during winter, runs directly into predictable ice drift patterns. The correct vector is 298, adjusted 17 degrees east to avoid the drift. Whoever recommended 315 either didn't check the seasonal radar data or didn't know how to read it. My mother's face had gone pale. Natalie's smile had frozen into something brittle, but I wasn't looking at them anymore. Cole set his champagne flute down on the nearest table, his full attention on me now. You work in tactical coordination? You could say that. Which sector? Detroit. The Navy Reserve officer who'd been watching me earlier moved closer, his body language suddenly alert, in a way that suggested he'd just solved a puzzle he'd been working on. Cole studied my face, and I could see him running calculations behind his eyes, trying to place me in the mental database of personnel he'd encountered or heard about. Were you involved in the Alaska operation? I was there. It was the truth, just not the specific truth he was looking for. I'd been on the coordinating team that had provided the meteorological and navigational data. I'd been the one who'd flagged the ice drift issue and recommended the adjusted vector that they'd apparently ignored. Cole's expression shifted, something between respect and reassessment. For the first time since I'd walked into this ballroom, someone was looking at me with genuine interest instead of polite dismissal. The tension in the room had changed quality. It was no longer awkward. It was electric. People were leaning forward slightly, sensing that something unscripted was happening, that the planned narrative of the evening had suddenly taken a left turn into territory no one had mapped. My phone vibrated in my purse. I knew without checking that it was another email about the investigation, another reminder that I was running out of time to mount a defense, another nudge toward the cliff edge where my entire career waited to fall. But right now, in this moment, I was exactly where I needed to be. Standing in a room full of people who'd spent decades underestimating me, finally saying something true. Cole Mitchell opened his mouth to ask another question, and I saw the moment arrive that would change everything. The moment when recognition would dawn, when the careful fiction my family had built around me would start to crack. Captain Harrison? Cole's voice had gone quiet, serious in a way that made the naval officers in the room straighten slightly. Captain Victoria Harrison from Sector Detroit? Every conversation stopped. The silence spread like ice forming over water, starting where we stood and radiating outward until the entire ballroom held its breath. My mother stared at Cole, then at me, confusion tightening her features into something she couldn't hide behind practiced politeness. Yes, my answer came simple and clean, carrying no pride or defensiveness. Just fact. What happened next tore through the room like a crack through breaking glass. Cole Mitchell snapped to attention, heels together, spine straight, hand rising in a crisp, perfect salute. The transformation was instantaneous, muscle memory overwhelming social context, military protocol asserting itself over cocktail party manners. 3 other SEALs in the crowd responded on reflex, their bodies moving before conscious thought could intervene. All of them suddenly at attention in the middle of a Charleston engagement party. Someone gasped. A woman dropped her champagne flute, and it shattered against the marble floor with a sound like punctuation. Natalie covered her mouth with both hands, eyes wide as if witnessing something physically impossible. My mother's voice broke into a whisper, barely audible over the sudden silence. What's happening? Cole lowered his hand slowly, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. The Great Lakes Rescue Operation Captain Harrison commanded is used as a training case study at Coronado. We study the tactical decisions, the crisis management, the outcome. 27 people saved in conditions that should have been fatal. His eyes hadn't left my face. I never realized you were the officer behind the radio transmissions we analyze. The retired Navy officer stepped forward, and I recognized the insignia on his jacket now. Rear Admiral. He extended his hand, and there was no mistaking the respect in his grip. Captain Harrison, it is an honor. I served with your district commander in the 90s. Your reputation precedes you. Someone in the crowd, I didn't see who, had pulled out their phone and was quietly reading something aloud to the people nearby. Captain Victoria Harrison, United States Coast Guard, Sector Detroit, Medal of Merit, Distinguished Service, 20 years of active duty, lead investigator on the Port Huron smuggling interdiction, commanding officer during the Ambassador Bridge incident, 27 lives saved in the January 12th Great Lakes rescue. The murmurs grew louder, spreading through the crowd as people began searching my name on their phones, fact-checking the sudden revelation that the woman they dismissed as doing paperwork was actually someone with a documented history of competence. The people who'd laughed politely when my mother introduced me were pulling their hands back from wherever they'd casually placed them, straightening their posture, avoiding direct eye contact, the body language of people realizing they'd made a significant social miscalculation. Cole spoke again, softer this time, and I heard genuine regret in his voice. Captain, I apologize for underestimating you when we first spoke. I should have recognized. I'm used to it. The words came out matter of fact, without bitterness, because that was the truth too. I was used to being underestimated, had built an entire life around people's inability to see me clearly. As the room shifted around me, recalibrating its collective perception, I felt the memories of that storm surge back with physical force. The freezing spray cutting through every layer of clothing, the chaos of voices over the radio, the moment when I'd had to make the decision between following protocol or following my own analysis, the weight of knowing that being wrong meant people died. None of these people in their silken linen had any concept of what that night had cost me, what it had taken out of my body and mind, and the reserve of strength I'd been drawing on for 2 decades. But for the first time in my life, the people who'd always stood above me on the family hierarchy were being forced to recalculate. For once, I didn't have to shrink so they could stay comfortable. The room was adjusting to me instead. The instant Cole's hand dropped from the salute, the ballroom erupted into noise that had nothing to do with celebration. Voices layered over each other in urgent whispers. Phones appeared in hands like conjured objects, fingers swiping and tapping as people scrambled to verify what they'd just witnessed. The careful choreography of the engagement party dissolved into something chaotic and electric, everyone suddenly aware they'd been operating under false assumptions. I stood perfectly still in the center of the gathering storm, watching the recalibration happen in real time. The women who'd laughed when my mother introduced me as someone who did paperwork were now studying me with expressions that cycled through embarrassment, curiosity, and something that looked uncomfortably like fear. The men in uniform had shifted their body language entirely. Shoulders back, attention focused, the casual superiority replaced by the wariness of people who just discovered they'd been rude to a superior officer. My mother's face had gone through several distinct phases of emotion in rapid succession: confusion, shock, something that might have been pride but arrived too late to mean anything, before settling on a kind of frozen panic. She kept looking between me and the crowd and back again, as if trying to understand how the daughter she'd spent 42 years diminishing had suddenly become the most important person in the room. Natalie had moved to Cole's side, one hand gripping his arm with enough force that her knuckles had gone white. Her expression held layers I'd never seen before: wounded pride, confusion, the dawning realization that the narrative she'd constructed about her successful life and her disappointing sister had just been exposed as fiction. People began moving toward me, a slow tide of bodies wanting proximity to someone who'd suddenly become significant. A woman in a coral dress stepped forward, her voice pitched with nervous energy. "Captain Harrison, that must have been terrifying. How did you stay calm?" "Training." The answer came automatically, the kind of response I'd given 100 times to similar questions. We prepare for worst-case scenarios, so when they happen, muscle memory takes over. But how do you prepare for something like that? A man in a civilian suit pressed closer, and I recognized the hunger in his expression. He wanted the story, wanted to own a piece of it for his own social currency. "What was going through your mind when you realized?" Judith appeared at my elbow, her hand landing on my forearm with proprietary pressure. She'd composed her face into something that approximated maternal pride, though it sat awkwardly on features more accustomed to disappointment. "Everyone, please!" Victoria must be exhausted from her trip. Her voice carried across the cluster of people, staking a claim she'd never bothered to make before. She's always been so dedicated to her work. Ever since she was young, I knew she'd do something important. The words arrived 20 years too late, delivered to the wrong audience, motivated by embarrassment rather than genuine recognition. I looked at my mother and saw her clearly for perhaps the first time in my adult life. A woman who'd spent decades managing appearances, curating the story she wanted to tell about her family, willing to rewrite history the moment it became convenient. I should have felt vindicated, should have experienced some rush of satisfaction at finally being acknowledged. But standing there with her hand on my arm and her revised version of my childhood spilling out for public consumption, all I felt was a profound weariness. The retired admiral who'd been watching me earlier materialized through the crowd, with the authority of someone used to parting seas of people through presence alone. "Captain Harrison, if you have a moment, I'd appreciate a word in private." His tone made it clear the request wasn't optional, and I felt grateful for the interruption. Judith's hand dropped from my arm as I followed him toward one of the quieter alcoves near the garden doors, away from the press of bodies and questions, and my family's belated attempts at claiming credit. We stopped in a corner where the music from the string quartet couldn't quite reach, where the garden lights cast shadows that gave us privacy without isolation. The Admiral turned to face me, and his expression had shifted from public respect to something more complicated. "I'm going to be direct because that's what people in our position do." His voice dropped low enough that no one passing could overhear. "Something's wrong. I saw it the moment you walked into this room, and I've seen it get worse with every minute. You're carrying weight that has nothing to do with being here." I started to deflect, to offer some bland reassurance, but he raised one hand to stop me. "I've been doing this long enough to recognize when someone's under attack. Political attack, specifically. The kind that comes with lawyers and senators and manufactured evidence." His eyes narrowed. "So I'm going to ask you directly. Are you being investigated for that rescue?" The question landed with enough precision that I knew denying it would be pointless. He'd already seen through to the truth. "Yes, sir." "Jason Pierce?" The name came out of his mouth with such specificity that my breath caught. "How?" "I made some calls after we spoke on the plane. Wanted to know more about the officer who'd saved my grandson." His mouth tightened into something grim, and I heard whispers. Pierce family whispers. The kind that happen in back channels when someone with connections is mounting a campaign. I didn't know what to say. The fact that the investigation had already become gossip in military circles meant it was worse than I'd thought, spreading faster than I could contain it. "What are they alleging?" "That I violated protocol, issued unsafe orders, endangered the crew." My voice came out steady despite the anxiety coiling in my chest. "They have a fabricated logbook with signatures from crew members saying Vector 315 was the agreed-upon safe route. And was it? It would have killed us all." The words came out flat, carrying the weight of absolute certainty. Ice drift at 315 would have resulted in a collision at speed. I went with 298 based on real-time radar analysis. Every person who walked off that boat alive did so because I ignored Pierce's recommendation. The Admiral studied my face for a long moment, and I saw the calculations happening behind his eyes. Then he pulled out his phone and typed something with quick efficiency. "I'm sending you something. An email you'll want to have for your hearing." He looked up, and his expression had gone hard with the kind of anger that came from watching politics corrupt competence. "When is it?" "January 16th, 8 a.m. Day after tomorrow." "Yes, sir." "You'll need to leave tonight to make it back in time." I nodded, already doing the math in my head. 14-hour drive if I left within the hour, assuming weather cooperated, and I didn't stop for more than fuel and coffee. My phone buzzed in my purse. The email from Admiral Thornton arrived with the subject line, "For your defense." Inside was a detailed analysis of the Great Lakes rescue from a maritime safety expert, complete with radar imagery, drift calculations, and a concluding paragraph that stated in unambiguous terms that Vector 298 had been the only viable option given the conditions. The signature at the bottom belonged to someone whose credentials would carry weight in any hearing room. "You didn't have to do this." His expression softened slightly. "Daniel is 9 years old. He has nightmares about drowning, wakes up his mother 3 times a week screaming. But he's alive to have those nightmares because you made the right call under impossible pressure." He paused, and his voice dropped even lower. "There's something you need to understand about men like Jason Pierce. They're not attacking your competence. They're attacking the fact that you were right when they were wrong. That's an unforgivable crime in their world. I swallowed against the tightness in my throat. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. Win your hearing, keep your career, then we'll call it even. He glanced toward the ballroom where the party continued without us. And Captain, your family doesn't deserve you. But that's their loss, not your failing. The words hit harder than any of the praise from strangers, landing in the place where I'd carried decades of trying to be enough for people who decided I never would be. He walked back into the crowd, leaving me alone with my phone and the email that might save my career, and the knowledge that I needed to leave this party, this city, this attempt at family connection, and drive through the night to fight for the one thing that had never asked me to be smaller. I took 3 deep breaths, straightened my shoulders, and walked back into the ballroom to find Natalie. She stood near the bar with Cole, their heads close together in urgent conversation. Whatever they were discussing stopped the moment she saw me approaching. Her expression went carefully neutral, the way it always did when she was preparing for conflict. I need to leave. My voice came out matter of fact, giving her no room to argue. I have an emergency situation that requires my immediate attention. Natalie's eyes widened, then narrowed. Leave? Now? Vic, this is my engagement party. I understand, and I'm sorry, but this isn't optional. Cole straightened, his military training recognizing the tone of someone operating under orders they couldn't refuse. Captain Harrison, is there anything I can do to assist? Before I could answer, Natalie's voice cut through with an edge I'd heard 1,000 times before. Of course there's nothing he can do, because this is what you do, isn't it? She gestured sharply, her champagne sloshing dangerously close to the rim of her glass. You show up, you make everything about you and your important work, and then you leave before anyone can actually rely on you being here. The accusation hung in the air between us, and I felt something crack open in my chest. Not anger, not hurt, just a kind of crystalline clarity that came from finally understanding exactly what I was looking at. Natalie, I kept my voice level, refusing to let emotion color the words. In the past 5 years, I've sent you $127,000. $15,000 for your business startup. $18,000 when your biggest client went bankrupt. $11,000 for equipment. $22,000 for this engagement and your dress. The rest in smaller amounts whenever you called saying you needed help. Her face went pale. I don't know what you're... I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, turned the screen toward her. The transaction history laid it out in unambiguous detail. Dates, amounts, memo lines that said things like, for Natalie wedding dress and Nat business emergency and help with mom's roof. Cole leaned over to look at the screen, and I watched his expression shift as he processed what he was seeing. Natalie, her voice barely above a whisper, is this true? She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Her eyes had gone bright with tears, but I couldn't tell if they were from shame or anger or something else entirely. Mom said the money came from savings, that she'd been setting aside. Mom has $47,000 in credit card debt that she's been paying minimum payments on for 3 years. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't need to. The numbers spoke clearly enough. I've been covering her shortfalls too. Every time she calls asking for help with a bill or a car repair or property tax, I send money. And you're absolutely right that I always leave. Because I have a job that saves lives, and that job doesn't stop just because it's inconvenient for family celebrations. People had started to notice the confrontation. Voices around us dropped to whispers as heads turned our direction. I could see my mother pushing through the crowd, her face tight with the realization that something was going wrong in a way she couldn't control. Natalie's tears had started falling now, black mascara tracking down her cheeks. Why didn't you tell us? Why did you let us think? Because you never asked. The words came out without heat, just exhausted truth. In 42 years, not once has anyone in this family asked me about my actual life, my work, my goals, what I do with my time or money. You made assumptions, and I let you keep them because it was easier than fighting to be seen. Cole's hand had dropped from Natalie's waist. He was looking at her with an expression I couldn't quite read. Something between disappointment and reassessment. Captain Harrison. His voice carried formal distance now, military protocol creating space where intimacy had been moments before. I apologize for my fiancé's characterization of your departure. Given the circumstances, I understand you have obligations that supersede social events. Natalie turned to him, shock replacing the tears. Cole, you can't seriously be taking her side. I'm not taking sides, but I am recognizing that your sister has been considerably more generous and considerably less appreciated than I was led to believe. He looked at me directly. What kind of emergency are we talking about? Investigation hearing, 0800 hours, January 16th, Detroit. He processed that immediately, military mind doing the calculation. You'll need to drive through the night. Yes, and the hearing relates to the rescue everyone's been talking about. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. Lieutenant under my command is alleging I violated protocol. He has political connections and fabricated evidence. Cole's jaw tightened. Retaliation for being overruled? Essentially. Then you need to go. Now. Don't waste time on goodbyes that don't matter. The words were harsh, but they came from someone who understood operational priorities. Natalie made a sound like she'd been struck, and Cole finally looked at her. We'll talk about this later. His tone had gone cold in a way that made me think my sister's engagement party might be ending very differently than she'd planned. Judith arrived in a flutter of purple silk and desperate energy, her hands reaching for both Natalie and me as if physical touch could somehow hold together what was fracturing. Girls, what's happening? Everyone's looking, please, whatever this is. I'm leaving, Mom, emergency work situation. Judith's face crumpled. Victoria, please, this is important to your sister. Can't someone else handle it? The question revealed everything about how she saw my life, my work, my choices. Can't someone else handle whether I keep my career or lose everything I've built? Can't someone else fight the politically connected officer trying to destroy my reputation? No, Mom, someone else can't handle it. Because it's my hearing, my career, my life. But this is family. The word hung there, and I looked at both of them. My mother with her desperate need for appearances. My sister with mascara-stained cheeks and borrowed money financing her perfect night. And felt the weight of it settle differently than it ever had before. Family is supposed to mean people who see you, people who support you, people who show up for your battles, not just their parties. I kept my voice gentle, because cruelty wasn't the point. I've been showing up for this family my entire life. And tonight, I need to show up for myself. Judith's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Natalie had started crying harder, though whether from shame or anger or genuine remorse, I couldn't tell and didn't have time to parse. I'm sorry I can't stay. I looked at Natalie, trying to find some genuine feeling beneath the exhaustion. I hope your engagement is everything you want it to be. I truly do. Then I turned and walked toward the exit, my cheap Target dress rustling with each step, my purse containing $12 million in net worth, and an investigation that could end everything, and a business card from an admiral who'd shown me more respect in one conversation than my family had in 42 years. The night air hit my face like absolution as I pushed through the doors and headed for my rental car. My phone buzzed continuously. Texts from Judith, from Natalie, from numbers I didn't recognize who'd gotten my contact information and wanted a piece of the story they'd witnessed unfold. I silenced the phone and started driving north. The highway swallowed me quickly, Interstate 26 stretching dark and mostly empty ahead. Other cars passed in the opposite direction, their headlights creating brief moments of illumination before returning me to darkness. The rental car's engine hummed steady and unremarkable. Exactly the kind of vehicle someone would choose who'd spent their entire life trying not to draw attention. But I'd drawn attention tonight, had stood in a ballroom and been saluted by a Navy SEAL captain, had watched 200 people recalibrate their entire perception of me in real time, had finally, after decades of silence, told my family exactly how much they'd been taking and how little they'd been giving. And now I was driving away from all of it, racing toward a hearing that would determine whether any of it mattered. My phone rang at 2:17 a.m., somewhere between South Carolina and Virginia. Cole Mitchell's name appeared on the screen. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity won. Captain Harrison. His voice sounded tired and slightly rough, like he'd been talking for hours. I apologize for calling so late. Or early, whatever this qualifies as. Commander Mitchell. I kept my eyes on the road, watching broken white lines disappear under my hood. Is Natalie all right? That's actually why I'm calling. He paused, and I heard the distinct sound of liquid being poured into a glass. We've been talking. Actually, I've been talking and she's been listening, which I gather is not the usual dynamic in your family. I didn't know how to respond to that, so I stayed quiet. I told her I can't marry someone who treats their family the way she's treated you. Not someone who's borrowed 6 figures and convinced herself it was a gift. Not someone who introduces their sister as a failure at her own engagement party. His voice had gone flat and cold. I've seen that behavior before. In my world, we call it exploitation. And I don't build my life with people who exploit others. I felt something twist in my chest. Commander Mitchell, I didn't tell you those things to sabotage my sister's relationship. I know. Which is what makes it worse from my perspective. You were just stating facts, and those facts reveal a pattern I can't ignore. He took a breath, and when he spoke again, his voice had softened slightly. My father walked out on my mother and me when I was 7, left us with nothing but debt. Took me 20 years to understand that the debt wasn't just financial. It was emotional. The weight of being told every day through his actions that we didn't matter enough for him to stay. I'm sorry. Don't be. I'm telling you this because I recognize what I saw tonight. You've been carrying your family's emotional and financial debt for decades. And instead of gratitude, they've given you dismissal and resentment. That ends now as far as I'm concerned. What does that mean? It means I told Natalie I need time to reconsider the engagement, that I can't commit to someone who hasn't demonstrated the capacity to value what actually matters. He paused again. It also means I want you to know I'll testify at your hearing if you need me. Character witness, professional assessment, whatever would help. The offer landed with unexpected weight, coming from someone who owed me nothing and had every reason to side with the woman he'd been planning to marry hours earlier. That's incredibly generous, but you don't have to. Captain Harrison. His voice went formal. Commander to commander. I spent 3 years in Afghanistan watching men under impossible pressure. I know what competence under fire looks like. I know what courage looks like. And I know what happens when political officers with family connections go after competent officers who make them look bad. He let that settle. I also know what it looks like when someone has been systematically undervalued by the people who should have valued them most. And I won't contribute to that pattern. I had to blink hard against the sudden burning in my eyes, the way tears threatened when defenses were already worn thin. Thank you. My voice came out rougher than I'd intended. That means more than you know. Drive safe, Captain. Win your hearing. And for what it's worth, your family's failure to see you says everything about them and nothing about you. The call ended, leaving me alone with the dark highway and the white lines and the weight of someone I barely knew offering me more support than my mother and sister had provided in a lifetime. I drove through the pre-dawn darkness into Virginia, then Maryland, watching the sky slowly lighten from black to deep blue to the pale gray that preceded sunrise. Rest stop coffee tasted like chemicals and regret, but it kept me alert through the stretches where exhaustion tried to drag my eyelids shut. Truck drivers gave me curious looks at gas stations, probably wondering what had a woman in a cocktail dress driving alone through the early morning hours. By the time I crossed into Pennsylvania, my phone had accumulated 43 text messages, most from Judith, each one cycling through the same themes: confusion about what had happened, demands that I call her immediately, assertions that I was overreacting and being unfair to Natalie. Not one apology. Not one acknowledgement of the money or the years or the casual cruelty of how they'd introduced me to 200 strangers. 3 messages from Natalie. The first 2 were variations on, "How could you do this to me?" and "You've ruined everything." The third, sent at 4:47 a.m., simply said, "Cole postponed the engagement." I should have felt something about that. Guilt, maybe, or vindication, or at least some complicated mix of both. But after 14 hours of driving and 2 days of watching my life fracture in multiple directions simultaneously, all I felt was a distant sort of numbness. My sister's romantic drama wasn't my responsibility to fix. Not anymore. Admiral Thornton's email pinged through at 5:52 a.m., the subject line reading, "Additional support." Inside was a list of 3 more military personnel, 2 Coast Guard veterans and a naval engineer, who'd volunteered to provide expert testimony about the Great Lakes rescue. All of them outranked Jason Pierce. All of them had credentials that would carry significant weight. The note at the bottom read, Sometimes the best response to political warfare is overwhelming competence. Give them nothing to work with except the truth. I pulled into a rest stop just outside Erie and sat in the car watching the sun break through clouds over Lake Erie's gray expanse. The same lake system where I'd pulled 27 people from drowning less than a week ago. The same waters I'd been serving for 2 decades, while my family made assumptions about my failure. My phone rang. Commander Peterson from District Headquarters. Captain Harrison, where are you? Pennsylvania, about 5 hours out. Good. The hearing's been confirmed for 0800 tomorrow morning, January 16th. Pierce's legal team is already here preparing. His voice carried tension. They're claiming they have new evidence that makes their case stronger. What evidence? They won't say until the hearing. But I've seen this tactic before. They're trying to create uncertainty, make you second-guess your preparation. He paused. Do you need anything from my end? No, sir. I have everything I need. Victoria. He dropped the formal rank, using my first name for perhaps the 3rd time in our 10-year professional relationship. This isn't a fair fight. They have lawyers, political connections, manufactured evidence. Are you sure you're prepared? I'm not just prepared, sir. I have the truth. I have the radar logs, I have the outcome. And I have testimonials from people whose judgment matters more than a senator's political maneuvering. Silence on the other end. Then something that might have been respect. See you tomorrow morning, Captain. Get some rest. The last 5 hours of driving passed in a blur of focused determination and mounting adrenaline. I'd stopped feeling tired somewhere around Ohio, my body running on the kind of emergency reserves that kicked in during crisis situations. By the time Detroit's skyline appeared on the horizon, I'd mentally rehearsed my testimony countless times, each repetition sharpening the arguments until they had the precision of surgical instruments. I pulled into a budget motel near the district headquarters at 1:47 p.m. on January 15th, still wearing the Target dress that now looks substantially worse for a 14-hour drive. My hair had come loose from its simple bun. I probably smelled like rest stop coffee and stress sweat. But I had 18 hours until the hearing. Time enough to shower, sleep for a few hours, review my evidence one final time, and walk into that room prepared to fight. I checked into the motel room and immediately opened my laptop, pulling up every piece of evidence I'd compiled. The radar logs, the audio recordings, the forensic analysis of the fabricated documents, the expert testimonials. I organized everything into a presentation that would dismantle Jason Pierce's allegations piece by piece. Then I set an alarm for 11 p.m., closed the blackout curtains, and collapsed onto the bed. Sleep came in fits and starts, my mind too wired to fully shut down. I dreamed of storms and drowning children and courtrooms where the walls kept closing in. When the alarm finally pulled me back to consciousness, I felt more exhausted than when I'd laid down. But exhaustion didn't matter. Only the hearing mattered. I showered in water that never quite got hot enough, dressed in my duty uniform with every ribbon and medal placed with mathematical precision, and spent the hours between midnight and dawn, reviewing my evidence until I could recite every data point from memory. At 7:15 a.m. on January 16th, I walked into district headquarters carrying my laptop and the weight of 20 years of service. Commander Peterson met me at the entrance, his expression grim. They're already in the conference room. Pierce, his lawyers, 3 board members. He handed me a folder. This is their new evidence, arrived an hour ago. I opened the folder and felt my stomach drop. Inside were photographs, doctored photographs, that appeared to show me in heated arguments with crew members during the mission. Overlaid text claimed these were taken during the decision-making process, that they demonstrated my reckless disregard for crew safety concerns. The photos were convincing if you didn't look too closely. But I did look closely, and I could see the subtle editing artifacts, the lighting inconsistencies, the timestamps that didn't align with our actual mission timeline. These are fabricated. My voice came out cold and certain. The metadata will prove it. Peterson nodded. I know, but we'll need to establish that during the hearing. And Captain? He met my eyes directly. Jason Pierce is in there with 3 lawyers and an entire political apparatus backing him. You're walking in with a laptop and 18 hours of preparation. Are you absolutely certain you're ready for this? I thought about my mother introducing me as the daughter who did paperwork, about Natalie calling me a failure while wearing a dress I'd paid for, about 42 years of making myself smaller so other people could feel larger. I'm ready. I straightened my shoulders, gripped my laptop bag, and walked toward the conference room where my entire career waited to be judged. The truth was about to become very expensive for Jason Pierce and everyone who'd helped him manufacture lies. And I was going to make sure they paid every penny. The conference room felt smaller than it should have given its actual dimensions, the walls seeming to contract under the weight of what was about to happen. Harsh fluorescent lighting cast everyone in the same unflattering illumination, erasing shadows and nuance until we all looked slightly washed out and two-dimensional. The air conditioning hummed with mechanical indifference, maintaining a temperature calibrated for long proceedings. Jason Pierce sat at the far end of the table, flanked by 3 attorneys in matching navy suits, their collective presence designed to project overwhelming force. He'd positioned himself with military precision, spine straight, uniform immaculate, projecting the confidence of someone who believed his last name was armor enough against consequence. The lead attorney, Martin Pierce, his uncle, the senator's son, reviewed documents with the casual efficiency of someone who'd never lost a case he couldn't afford to lose. The board members occupied the middle ground, 3 senior officers whose expressions revealed nothing. Commander Peterson sat to my right, his presence the only indication I had any institutional support at all. Everyone else in the room had arrived with agendas that didn't include my vindication. The JAG representative called the hearing to order with procedural language that felt both solemn and perfunctory. We all understood the real battle here had nothing to do with Coast Guard regulations and everything to do with whose version of truth would survive the political machinery. "Lieutenant Pierce!" The JAG officer's voice cut through the tension. "You filed allegations of protocol violation, unsafe command decisions, and falsification of records. Please present your evidence." Jason stood with the smooth confidence of someone who'd rehearsed this performance until it looked spontaneous. He outlined his case methodically, the mission timeline, the decision point about vector selection, his alleged attempts to raise safety concerns, my purported dismissal of crew input. His narrative painted me as reckless, ego-driven, willing to risk lives to prove my own tactical genius. The fabricated logbook came out, pages photocopied and entered into evidence. 3 crew signatures underneath statements claiming they'd advocated for Vector 315 and been overruled against their professional judgment. Then came the doctored photographs, projected onto a screen where everyone could examine them. Me appearing to shout at crew members, my face contorted with what looked like rage or panic, timestamps suggesting these moments of crisis mismanagement had occurred during critical decision-making windows. Martin Pierce walked the board through each piece of evidence with the measured confidence of someone building an unassailable case. His voice never rose, never betrayed emotion, just laid out fact after manufactured fact until the cumulative weight seemed overwhelming. Captain Harrison, by her own admission, deviated from standard protocol without consulting her crew or seeking approval from command. Her decision to ignore established safety procedures resulted in unnecessary risk. That the mission succeeded does not excuse the recklessness of her methods. His eyes met mine across the table. We're not here to question the outcome. We're here to address the dangerous precedent of a commanding officer who believes herself above the rules that protect all of us. The speech landed with calculated precision. Several board members shifted in their seats, expressions suggesting they were already forming judgments. The JAG officer turned to me. "Captain Harrison, you'll have an opportunity to respond. Do you have representation?" "I represent myself." I opened my laptop and connected it to the room's display system. "And I have evidence that will demonstrate Lieutenant Pierce's allegations are not merely incorrect, but deliberately fabricated." Martin Pierce's expression flickered, just for a moment, just enough to reveal he hadn't expected me to come prepared with anything beyond defensive testimony. I began with the radar data, displaying the original logs from the night of the rescue. The ice drift at Vector 315 appeared as clear as a photograph, unmistakable evidence of exactly why that route would have been fatal. I walked through the calculations, showing projected collision time, impact velocity, probable casualties. This is what I saw at 21:47 hours on January 12th. This is the data that informed my decision. I advanced to the next slide. Vector 298 provided 17 degrees of eastward deviation, sufficient to avoid the drift field while maintaining reasonable response time. The decision wasn't reckless. It was the only option that kept everyone alive. But you made that decision unilaterally. Jason's voice carried the edge of someone watching his narrative slip. You didn't consult the crew. I pulled up the mission audio, the recording crystal clear. My voice. Vector 298. Repeat, 298. Ice drift at 315. Jason's voice. Understood, Captain. Vector 298. Path is clear. My voice. Confirm. Path clear at 298. Jason's voice. Confirmed. 298 clear. No obstacles. The recording played through the conference room speakers. Jason's voice confirming the safety of the route he now claimed was dangerously unvetted. I watched his face drain of color as his own words condemned his current testimony. Lieutenant Pierce didn't just accept my decision. He confirmed the route was safe. I paused the audio. If he genuinely believed Vector 298 was dangerous, why did he explicitly confirm its safety during the operation? Martin Pierce leaned forward, recovering quickly. Audio can be misinterpreted. The lieutenant may have been confirming receipt of orders rather than... The metadata is time-stamped and verified by our communication system. I pulled up the technical specifications. There's no ambiguity in his confirmation. He stated the path was clear. Either he was competent enough to verify that claim, or he confirmed something he couldn't assess. Both scenarios contradict his current allegations. I advanced to the next evidence package, the logbook Lieutenant Pierce submitted as evidence. I displayed it alongside the official mission log. Side by side, the discrepancies became obvious. Different paper stock, inconsistent handwriting pressure, signatures that didn't match known exemplars from the crew members who'd allegedly signed it. I ran forensic analysis on the submitted logbook. The paper is standard office supply stock purchased in bulk, available at any retailer. The official logbooks use Coast Guard-specific paper with embedded security markers. I magnified a section of the forged log. You can see here where someone attempted to replicate the security markers with a standard printer. The resolution is insufficient to match authentic documents. One of the board members leaned forward, squinting at the projection. Lieutenant Pierce, where did you obtain this logbook? It was maintained during the mission as a backup record. Our protocol doesn't include backup logbooks during active operations. Commander Peterson's voice carried absolute certainty. There is one official log, maintained by the commanding officer. Any additional documentation would violate information security procedures. Jason's attorneys whispered urgently among themselves, and I pressed the advantage. The photographs Lieutenant Pierce submitted as evidence of my alleged mismanagement. I displayed them in high resolution, then overlaid them with the original images I'd retrieved from our ship's security system. Watch carefully. I played the comparison in slow motion, highlighting where pixels had been altered, where shadows didn't align with light sources, where timestamps had been digitally modified to place the images during critical mission moments when they'd actually been taken during routine operations hours earlier. These are real photographs that have been manipulated to appear to document something that never happened. The metadata from the original files shows they were taken at 14:32 hours, nearly 7 hours before the rescue operation began. Someone took images from standard operations, edited my expression, altered the timestamps, and submitted them as evidence of crisis mismanagement. The room had gone completely silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to have quieted, as if the building itself was holding its breath. I have one final piece of evidence. I pulled up an email, the one that Commander Peterson had forwarded to me 2 hours before the hearing. This is internal correspondence from Lieutenant Pierce to his father, Rear Admiral Pierce, sent 6 days before he filed his official complaint. I read it aloud, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. Dad, if I can remove Harrison from command, the commander position opens up. With your connections in my record, I can fast-track to that promotion within 18 months. I just need to make her look incompetent once. The Great Lakes Rescue gives me leverage. I can claim she endangered us, fabricate some documentation, and let the political machine do the rest. She's too principled to fight dirty, and she doesn't have the connections to protect herself. The silence that followed was absolute. Jason Pierce had gone white, his hands gripping the table edge with enough force to make his knuckles prominent. Martin Pierce's face had shifted from confident to calculating, already running through legal options and damage control. That email is privileged communication. It was forwarded to me by someone in your office who found it unconscionable. I kept my voice level, professional, and it establishes clear premeditation for filing false allegations. fabricating evidence, and attempting to destroy a superior officer's career for personal advancement. The senior board member, a captain whose weathered face suggested decades of service, cleared his throat. "Lieutenant Pierce, do you deny sending this email?" Jason opened his mouth, closed it, looked to his attorneys. Martin Pierce had already begun packing documents into his briefcase with quick, efficient movements that suggested he knew the battle was lost and was preparing for retreat. "We need time to review." The JAG officer cut him off. "Based on the evidence presented, this hearing is concluded. The allegations against Captain Harrison are dismissed. Furthermore, we're opening a formal investigation into Lieutenant Jason Pierce for falsifying official documents, filing false reports, and perjury." He looked at Jason with something approaching contempt. "You're suspended from duty effective immediately pending criminal investigation." Jason's face had gone from white to red, fury and panic warring for dominance in his expression. "You can't do this. Your father's rank doesn't protect you from criminal prosecution for fraud." The JAG officer stood. "This hearing is adjourned. Captain Harrison, you're cleared for immediate return to duty with our apologies for the distress this investigation has caused." The room emptied quickly, people flowing out as if released from pressure. Jason Pierce left flanked by his attorneys, their urgent whispers suggesting they were already strategizing how to minimize the legal consequences about to rain down. Commander Peterson shook my hand with visible relief, then departed to handle the administrative aftermath. I sat alone in the empty conference room, looking at the projected evidence still displayed on the screen, feeling the adrenaline slowly drain from my system and leave behind bone-deep exhaustion. The door opened again. Admiral Thornton stepped through, still in his uniform despite his retirement, carrying himself with the authority of someone who'd earned every decoration on his chest. "I got here as fast as I could. I was prepared to testify, but it seems you didn't need me." His eyes held something like pride. "That was the most thorough evisceration of a fraudulent case I've witnessed in 40 years. I did need you, sir. Your email analysis was crucial, and knowing I had backup gave me confidence to push harder than I might have otherwise." He nodded slowly, then took the seat Jason Pierce had occupied earlier. "Captain, I want you to understand something. What just happened in this room, that wasn't just about proving your competence. That was about refusing to let political machinery crush truth. Most officers in your position would have tried to negotiate, to compromise, to find some middle ground that let everyone save face. There wasn't middle ground to find. He either lied or he didn't." "Exactly." Admiral Thornton leaned back, and his expression went contemplative. "My generation built a lot of systems to protect competence, but we also built systems that protect connections. You just proved that when you bring enough truth to bear, connections don't matter." His voice softened. "Daniel asks about you constantly, wants to know when he can meet the captain who saved him. His parents want to thank you properly." The thought of facing that family's gratitude felt overwhelming in a way the hearing somehow hadn't. "I'm just glad he's safe." "You're glad. That boy is alive because you made the right call under impossible pressure, then defended that call against people with more power than principle." Admiral Thornton stood. "Commander Peterson mentioned they're considering you for promotion. Commander by year's end, most likely. You've earned it." After he left, I sat in the empty conference room with my laptop still open to the evidence that had saved my career, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in longer than I could remember. Peace. Not the peace of vindication or victory, but the peace of knowing that I'd stood for truth, even when it would have been easier to fold, that I'd fought for my dignity without compromising my integrity, that I'd won not through connections or politics, but through competence and preparation, and refusing to accept a narrative that contradicted reality. My phone buzzed. A text from Natalie. "Cole told me what happened at your hearing. I'm glad you won." Not "I'm sorry," not "I was wrong," just acknowledgement that I'd won, as if this had been a competition instead of me fighting to keep my career. I typed back, "Thank you, nothing more." Then I opened a new message thread and began typing to Judith. "Mom, I'm coming home next week. We need to talk about boundaries." The drive back to Nebraska happened a week later, after I'd caught up on sleep and duty rosters and the accumulated administrative work that had piled up during the investigation. The Michigan countryside gave way to Ohio farmland, gave way to Indiana's flat expanses, gave way to the Nebraska plains I'd grown up in, each mile marker taking me further from the career that defined me and closer to the family that never had. The house looked exactly as it always had, small and sturdy and filled with memories that felt heavier than they should. Judith's car sat in the driveway next to a compact sedan I didn't recognize, but assumed belonged to Natalie. They'd both come then. Good. This conversation needed to happen with everyone present. I knocked instead of using my key, making it clear this wasn't a casual family visit. Judith answered immediately, her face cycling through several emotions before settling on nervous anticipation. Victoria, come in, please. We've been waiting. The living room had been tidied to the point of sterility. Every surface cleared, pillows arranged with geometric precision. Natalie sat on the couch looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. No makeup, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing jeans and a Michigan State sweatshirt instead of her usual carefully curated outfits. I took the chair across from them, setting my purse on the side table. The bank statement was folded inside, waiting. We need to have a conversation we should have had years ago. I kept my voice level, not cruel, but not soft either. About money, about expectations, about what family means. Judith's hands twisted in her lap. Victoria, sweetie, if this is about the engagement party, it's about the last 20 years. About how you introduced me to strangers as someone who did paperwork while I was funding Natalie's businesses and your home repairs. About how I sent $127,000 to this family and never once heard thank you. Natalie flinched, her eyes going red-rimmed. Vic, I didn't know. You didn't ask. I pulled out the bank statement and unfolded it, the paper crisp and damning. This is my current financial position. Read it. I watched Judith's face as she processed the numbers, the checking account balance, the investment portfolio, the real estate holdings, the total sum of $12,437,892.67. Her mouth opened and closed 3 times before words came out. This can't be right. It's correct to the penny as of this morning. I took the statement back. I made this money through a software company I helped build 15 years ago, through real estate investments in Detroit when everyone else was fleeing, through careful planning and competent financial management over 2 decades. Natalie was crying now, quiet tears that she didn't bother to wipe away. Why didn't you tell us? The question hit me wrong, and I felt anger flash through my carefully maintained composure. Why didn't you ask? In 42 years, Natalie, you have never once asked me about my actual life, my goals, my work beyond the dismissive label you'd given it, my financial situation. You made assumptions, and when I sent money, you took it without curiosity about where it came from or what it meant. I thought Mom was helping. Natalie's voice broke. I thought it was family helping family. It was family helping family. But it was only flowing one direction. I turned to Judith. Mom, you have $47,000 in credit card debt. I know because I've been watching your credit score decline for 3 years, waiting to see if you'd ask for help or try to handle it yourself. Judith's face crumpled. I didn't want to burden you, but you were fine burdening me with every other expense. The roof, the car, the property taxes, the medical bills. Every time you called asking for money, I sent it. And not once did you say thank you. Not once did you acknowledge what it took for me to maintain that kind of financial availability. We thought you had savings, Judith tried. I do have savings. Substantial savings, but you never asked how substantial. You never asked what I did to build those savings. You never asked what sacrifices I made or what I gave up to be your emergency fund. I paused, letting that settle. So here's what's going to change. I will not be sending any more money. Not to cover debts, not for emergencies, not for anything. The shock on both their faces was almost comical. Natalie recovered first, her voice small and uncertain. But what if we need help? Then you'll find solutions the way most adults do. Payment plans, budget adjustments, asking for help from sources that aren't your daughter, who you've spent decades treating as an afterthought. My voice didn't rise, but it carried iron. I will help you create financial plans. I will offer advice, but I will not be your ATM anymore. Judith started to cry, real tears that came with the kind of gasping breaths that suggested genuine distress. But I'm your mother. You can't just abandon. I'm not abandoning you. I'm establishing boundaries that should have existed all along. I softened slightly because cruelty wasn't the goal. Mom, I love you. But love doesn't mean I have to sacrifice my own well-being to enable your financial mismanagement. Love doesn't mean I accept being treated as invisible except when you need something. Natalie wiped her face with her sleeve, and when she spoke, her voice carried something I'd never heard before. Genuine humility. You're right. About all of it. I've been selfish and blind and so focused on my own problems that I never saw what you were giving up. Her tears came harder. Cole canceled our engagement. He said he couldn't marry someone who treated their family the way I treated you. He said if I couldn't see your value, I wouldn't see his either. The news should have given me satisfaction, but all I felt was tired sadness. I didn't tell you those things to sabotage your relationship. I know. Which makes it worse, doesn't it? That you were just telling the truth, and the truth was damning enough to make him walk away. She drew a shaky breath. I'm sorry, Vic. Really, genuinely sorry. Not because I lost Cole, but because I spent our entire lives resenting you for being stronger than me instead of learning from you. The apology landed with unexpected weight. Not because I'd been waiting for it, but because it sounded authentic in a way Natalie's words rarely did. Judith reached for my hand and I let her take it. I've been a terrible mother to you. Not because I didn't love you, but because I was so busy trying to make Natalie feel special that I made you feel invisible. Her grip tightened. Can you forgive me? I don't know yet. The honesty felt important, but I'm willing to try to build something new if you're willing to actually see me. We sat in that living room for 3 more hours, talking through decades of misunderstandings and unspoken resentments. Judith cried more. Natalie asked questions about my life that she should have asked years ago. I laid out expectations and boundaries with the precision I use for mission planning. By the time I left, something had shifted, not fixed. Healing would take time, but cracked open enough to let light through. 3 months later, I drove back to Nebraska for Thanksgiving. The difference was immediately apparent. Natalie opened the door wearing an apron splattered with flour, her hair tied back, no makeup, just her actual face looking younger and less guarded than I'd seen in years. You're cooking? I couldn't keep the surprise from my voice. Learning to cook. There's a difference. She grinned, and it reached her eyes. But Marcus has been teaching me. Come meet him. Marcus turned out to be exactly what Natalie had described on the phone. A high school history teacher with a gentle manner and an easy laugh, who looked at my sister like she was interesting rather than just beautiful. They'd met at a community college class Natalie had enrolled in after Cole left, both of them learning basic accounting because they'd realized they needed to understand money management. Dinner was simple and slightly overcooked, but it was real. Judith asked me about my work with genuine interest, listening to my answers without trying to redirect conversation toward Natalie. Natalie talked about her new job as an event coordinator for a nonprofit, making $45,000 a year, and proud of earning it without family money. When Judith excused herself to get dessert, Natalie leaned close. I paid Mom back $3,000 last month. It's not much compared to what you gave us, but I'm setting up payment plans. Her eyes were bright with something like pride. I want to earn back what I took, even if it takes years. You don't have to. I do, though, because I need to prove to myself that I can, that I'm not just the pretty daughter who takes from people who actually accomplish things. The words hung between us, and I recognized them for what they were. Not just apology, but transformation. My sister was finally growing into herself. 4 months after that, Commander Peterson called me into his office with an expression that managed to be both formal and pleased. Captain Harrison, effective April 1st, you'll be promoted to commander. The board was unanimous. You've more than earned it. The news landed with quiet satisfaction rather than triumph. Commander, a rank I'd stopped believing I'd achieve after the investigation, now handed to me by people who'd seen me defend truth against political power. The ceremony happened on a cold April morning, with rain threatening overhead. Judith and Natalie flew in to watch, standing in the crowd of Coast Guard personnel and families. I caught my mother's eye during the oath, and she was crying. But this time they were tears of actual pride, arriving at the right moment instead of 20 years late. When the ceremony ended and people clustered around to offer congratulations, I saw Natalie speaking with some of my crew members. One of them was showing her something on their phone, probably mission logs or operational data, and she was asking questions that suggested genuine interest rather than polite performance. My baby sister was finally learning to see beyond herself, a year after the engagement party that had fractured everything. I received a wedding invitation. Natalie and Marcus. Small ceremony, 50 guests. Backyard of Judith's house. The note inside was handwritten. Vic, I know I don't deserve you standing beside me after everything, but I'm asking anyway. Not as the sister who took from you for decades, but as the sister who's trying to become someone worthy of you. Will you be my maid of honor? I called her that night. The conversation was brief. Yes, I'd be honored. The wedding was nothing like the engagement party that never happened. No chandelier, no 200 guests, no expensive venue. Just family and close friends gathered in a yard where string lights hung from tree branches and folding chairs sat on grass that needed mowing. Natalie wore a simple dress that cost $300, which she'd saved for over 6 months. Marcus wore a suit from JCPenney that he'd owned for 5 years. The ceremony lasted 12 minutes, and when they kissed, the applause came from people who genuinely loved them. At the reception, Cole Mitchell appeared, invited by Natalie as closure and carried forward by genuine good wishes. He found me near the dessert table, looking comfortable in civilian clothes. Commander Harrison, congratulations on the promotion. I heard it was well-deserved. Thank you. And congratulations to you. Peterson mentioned you married a nurse? Best decision I ever made. She's stationed at Walter Reed, I'm at Little Creek. We make it work. His expression went thoughtful. I need to thank you. For what? For showing me that the right person is someone whose values align with yours, not someone whose appearance impresses other people. He glanced toward where Natalie stood with Marcus, both of them laughing at something one of the guests had said. She seems happier than I ever saw her. I think she finally figured out who she actually is, instead of who she thought she should be. That's a rare gift to give someone, even if you didn't mean to give it. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the reception unfold with its modest joy and authentic connection. Your sister told me you haven't taken a single dollar from them since the engagement party. Not even when your mother's furnace died last winter. She called me about the furnace. I helped her find a payment plan with the HVAC company. They're managing it themselves, and they're proud of that. That's the difference between enabling and empowering. Cole nodded slowly. The world needs more people who know where that line is. After he left, I found myself standing at the edge of the yard, watching my family celebrate my sister's marriage to a good man who loved her for the person she was becoming, rather than the fantasy she'd been performing. Judith was laughing with one of Marcus's aunts. Natalie was dancing with her new husband to music playing from someone's phone speaker. Everything was modest and real, and more beautiful than any expensive venue could have achieved. My phone buzzed with a text from Commander Peterson. Budget approved for the new rescue coordination system. Your design, your implementation. Well done, Commander. I stood there holding my phone, wearing a bridesmaid dress I'd bought myself, watching my family function without needing my money or my martyrdom, and felt something settle deep in my chest that I'd been chasing my entire life without knowing it. Contentment. Not because they finally saw me, but because I'd finally stopped needing them to. The Monday after Natalie's wedding, I drove to Lake Michigan and stood on the shoreline at dawn. The water stretched gray-green and restless toward a horizon, where sky and lake blurred into each other. Wind carried the smell of deep water and distant storms, familiar and centering in ways that land never quite managed. I thought about the journey from that Charleston ballroom to this Detroit morning, about standing in an $89 dress while my sister called me unremarkable, about the investigation that tried to destroy me for being competent, about finally establishing boundaries that let love exist without sacrifice. My phone stayed silent in my pocket. No emergency calls, no family crises. No one needed me to be smaller so they could feel larger. I pulled out the phone and opened the voice memo app, something I'd been planning for weeks. Time to tell this story the way it needed to be told. Not for vindication, but for every woman who'd ever been made to feel invisible by people who should have seen them. My name is Victoria Harrison. I'm 43 years old. I'm a commander in the United States Coast Guard. And I want to tell you something important. Dignity is not about people seeing you. Dignity is about you seeing yourself. I spent 42 years living as the invisible woman, the disappointing daughter, the sister who existed to make someone else shine. I let them define me because I thought that's what family meant. Accommodation, sacrifice, making yourself small so others could expand into the space you left empty. But here's what I learned standing in that Charleston ballroom when a Navy SEAL saluted me in front of everyone who'd dismissed me. Being seen by others is temporary. Being seen by yourself is permanent. My family finally sees me now. My mother calls to ask about my work, really listening to the answer. My sister built her own life without using mine as a foundation. And that's good, it's healing, it's progress. But the truth is, I didn't reclaim my dignity when they recognized me. I reclaimed it when I stopped waiting for their recognition to validate my existence. Dignity is standing in a hearing room alone, defending the truth against people with more power than principle, and refusing to compromise what you know is right. Dignity is looking at $12 million in your bank account and knowing you earned every penny through competence and careful planning, regardless of whether anyone else acknowledges it. Dignity is setting boundaries with people you love, not because you want to hurt them, but because you finally understand that love without respect is just obligation wearing a mask. I paused the recording, watching waves crash against the shoreline with patient repetition. The water didn't care who acknowledged its power. It just existed, shaping continents through the simple act of being itself. I started recording again. If you're watching this from somewhere that feels invisible, I want you to understand something. You don't need permission to take up space. You don't need someone else's validation to know your worth. You don't need to wait for a dramatic moment of recognition to claim your own dignity. You just need to stop shrinking. Stop editing yourself to fit other people's comfort. Stop apologizing for being competent. Stop accepting narratives about yourself that contradict the reality of what you've built and who you've become. Your family may never fully understand you. Your accomplishments may never receive the recognition they deserve. The people you've carried may never acknowledge the weight you bore for them. And that's okay, because dignity doesn't come from external validation. It comes from internal certainty. I saved 27 lives in a blizzard. I built a fortune through intelligence and strategic planning. I defended my career against fabricated allegations backed by political power. I established boundaries with family members who'd spent decades taking without giving. And none of that makes me remarkable. What makes me remarkable is that I did all of it while being told I was unremarkable. I succeeded while being dismissed. I built while being undermined. I grew while being diminished, just like you. Because if you're watching this, if this story resonates, it's because you know what it feels like to be invisible in your own life, to have your contributions overlooked, to watch people who've accomplished less receive more praise, to carry the weight while someone else gets the credit. So here's what I want you to do. Not tomorrow, not when the time is right now. Look at what you've built. Really look at it. The career, the savings, the competencies you've developed, the crises you've managed, the people you've helped, the storms you've survived, and recognize that all of it happened because of you. Not despite people failing to see you, but because you saw yourself clearly enough to keep going anyway. That's dignity. That's power. That's the kind of strength that doesn't need anyone else's validation because it validates itself. I'm standing on the shore of Lake Michigan at dawn. The water is cold and restless and beautiful. The sky is turning from gray to pale gold. In about 2 hours, I'll report for duty and coordinate operations that might save lives or might just be routine patrols. Either way, I'll do it with competence and care, whether anyone acknowledges it or not. And tonight, I'll go home to an apartment I paid for with money I earned. I'll check my bank balance and feel satisfied by my own financial security. I'll call my mother and sister and have conversations built on mutual respect instead of one-way sacrifice. Not because they finally learned to see me, but because I learned to see myself. And once you see yourself clearly, truly see yourself without the distorting lens of other people's expectations, you realize something profound. You were never invisible. You were just surrounded by people who didn't know how to look. So look at yourself now. Really look. And recognize what I'm recognizing, that you are enough. You have always been enough. And you don't need anyone's permission to claim the dignity that was yours all along. I stopped recording and sent the file to myself, backing it up to 3 different locations. Then I stood on that shoreline watching the sun fully break through clouds, turning the lake from gray to silver to something approaching blue. My phone buzzed one more time. A text from Natalie. Marcus and I are talking about buying a house. Can I call you for advice this weekend? Just advice, I promise. We're handling the money ourselves. I typed back, call anytime. I'm proud of you. And I meant it, not proud of who she'd been, but proud of who she was becoming through her own effort and growth, finally learning to build instead of borrow. The water kept moving. The sun kept rising. I kept standing there, a commander in the United States Coast Guard, a woman with $12 million and hard-won dignity, someone who'd learned that the only validation that matters is the kind you give yourself. Somewhere out there, someone else was standing in their own Charleston ballroom, being introduced as an afterthought, carrying secret strength that no one acknowledged. This story was for them, to say, I see you, and more importantly, see yourself. Because once you do, everything changes. I turned away from the water and walked back toward my car. Duty called. Not the dramatic kind that made headlines, but the steady, competent kind that saved lives through careful planning and professional excellence. The kind that had always defined me, whether anyone noticed or not. And now finally I noticed. I saw myself clearly. I claimed my dignity without apology. The rest was just details.